Hi, I'm Jen, jengerardi.com, because you deserve to be you, be whole, and be supported. And today I'm going to be talking about something I wrote about in my newsletter this week. So if you're not on my email list and you missed that, if you go to jengerardi.com and subscribe, you'll get an email once a week where I talk about something interesting in the world of relationships, boundaries, etc., and also upcoming things that I'm doing. And I've got some free and open to anyone community workshops and Q&A calls coming up, and I've also got some Small Business Saturday promotions coming up for really big discounts on group and one-on-one sessions. So definitely check those things out. But today, what we're going to get into is we're going to talk about conflict and whether there are situations in which conflict can actually bring more connection in a relationship instead of disconnection. So, in unhealthy relationships or in dynamics where people don't know how to have conflict in a healthy way, we often experience any kind of conflict as being a disconnection in the relationship. Sometimes relationship ending disconnection, and sometimes it's that thing where you kind of don't talk about it and everything feels awkward, and then eventually you get over it and act like it never happened. But there's never really a repair, and the conflict is never really resolved in those kinds of dynamics. And so the disconnection just lingers. And if the conflict is consistent and ongoing, then the disconnection grows and eventually the relationship becomes unsustainable. So, probably if you're listening to this, you have experienced that in at least some relationships in your life. And so, what we're talking about today is what is the difference between that and the kind of relationship where conflict actually makes the relationship closer because it opens up more understanding and more vulnerability. So, we're talking about this from a framework of the internal skills and the external skills. So, self-awareness and boundaries. And what's needed for conflict to happen in a healthy way is both parties need to have good internal skills, good self-awareness, and good external skills, good boundaries. And there needs to be safety in the relationship space. And the safety means that there is differentiation. People are taking responsibility for their own internal states, and that the boundaries are going to be respected. So there's no sense of like having to fight for being allowed to have a boundary. So the reason I'm talking about this more is because I went to visit a friend, and this friend and I have a lot of things we disagree about, and we spent a lot of our time together disagreeing. And we ended our time together at the end of the weekend feeling closer than we had at the beginning of the weekend. Um, and I did some reflecting about why is that? What is it about this relationship? I wrote about it in my newsletter, and then I got a lot of questions. I got a lot of questions because that is not something that a lot of you have experienced. So I'm going to talk about in this case, there's so many directions this could go. So if this brings up more questions, or if it doesn't feel like I address the specific thing that you've experienced in conflicts in your relationship, then comment. We'll talk about it because this is this is an ongoing conversation. So let's start with the internal, the self-awareness skills. So I need to have enough self-awareness in conflict to notice, am I present in the conflict that's happening right now in this moment? Or is something getting triggered that's not about this moment, which could be like a fear of abandonment, a fear of if I don't please this person, they're going to stop liking me and we're going to stop being close. And, and that could go back to childhood or even generational patterns. So is there something like that coming up that's like really old stuff that's about me and it's about my history and my experience, and it's valid and worthwhile and should be supported. But it's not helpful in a conflict if it's not about the conflict that's actually happening right now. You could also be having stuff come up that's from previous interactions with this person. And, this is the like, you always do this or you never do this. And it's no longer about just this one conflict. And frequently that happens when there hasn't been good repair and resolution in previous conflicts. So all of those previous conflicts have just kind of been brushed aside. We're not talking about them, but they're not gone. They're not finished. They don't feel settled. And so then anytime there's a fresh conflict that feels related, it brings all of that back up. So we're going to get into that. But that's one piece of self-awareness is, am I present with what's happening right now? And are there other things that I need? Am I thirsty? Am I hungry? Am I tired? Am I, getting sore from sitting in one position for a long time? Um, am I getting overstimulated, overwhelmed from the, input of talking or of raised voices, if that's something that's happening in the conflict? Or are there other things going on? Like I'm trying to have this conversation, but there's children screaming in the background. So any of those things, are there sensory needs or physical needs or emotional needs that I'm having come up that I need to attend to in order to be able to stay with the conflict and not be trying to like rush it, put a lid on it, not be trying to appease somebody to make it stop, um, and not be um, overreacting or having a bigger reaction than the situation calls for because there are some other needs that are not being attended to. Both parties need to have that kind of self-awareness. And both parties need to also have good enough differentiation to recognize those things are mine. It is not the other person's fault that my childhood trauma is being triggered right now. It's good for them to know that's the boundaries piece. So we'll switch to that in a minute, but it's my responsibility to communicate something happening for me, not the other person's responsibility to guess or just know that that's happening for me. And it's also my responsibility to to take care of what I need around that or ask for what I need around what's coming up for me. It's not the other person's responsibility to take care of my feelings for me. And that differentiation is really important in conflict because we might feel some really strong and really unpleasant things. And some of those things might be ours, and some of those things we might feel those things about the other person, depending on the topic or how big of a conflict it is. And so we need to have really clear differentiation of what is my responsibility, what is the other person's responsibility. And so we're talking, these are the pieces that are my responsibility, my feelings, my reactions, how I speak, um, and asking for or naming what I need. Those things are all my responsibility. Now, if the other person is getting super close to my face and yelling, that's their responsibility. And so again, the boundaries is the part about negotiating those external things, but it's important to recognize it's not my fault if somebody else is losing control of their physical reactions. It's not my fault if it's bringing up somebody else's childhood trauma. Um, and again, with asking for what we need, and then as we start to switch toward the boundary piece, we're talking about asking for what we need in a way that's taking responsibility for our own needs, and rather than placing blame. So even in a situation, somebody's in my face yelling, and I also want to be very clear here. We're talking about conflict in well-established relationships in which you generally have a good rapport with someone. We're not talking about some total stranger at work is in your face behaving inappropriately. I would encourage much stronger boundaries in that kind of situation where there's not any previously established safety. And we're going to get to the safety part. So make sure that you stay, because all of these parts, they all have to be there to have healthy conflict. So on the boundaries part, instead of saying, you're always right in my face, say, I can't listen when you're right in my face. It's overwhelming. I feel scared right now. I need you to back up a little bit. or I need to take a break because my heart's racing now because that was too much for me. And now I'm like in panic and I can't focus on the words that are being said. I need that. I need space. I need a break. I need it to be a little quieter. So those are starting to get into the boundaries piece, but naming it in a way that's taking ownership of what you need rather than the blame on the other person for not having already known what you needed or for having gotten heated in the first place. Because that happens when there's conflict and we feel passionately about it. But it's important that there's the ability to name the things that we need and the boundaries that we have so that those things don't we can have healthy reactions to those things that happen in conflicts. So in healthy relationships, even in the middle of a conflict, can say, you know what, I really need to use the bathroom right now. I'll come back. Or even, you know what, this is getting to be too much. I need to take a break and we need to come back to this conversation later. And that's different from the like, I'm not talking to you about this anymore. And it's just expected to like go away and we never talk about it again. In healthy conflict, when there needs to be a break, people get the break they need. They get time. Nobody's following to continue bringing it up and badgering while the other person's trying to take a break. It's truly, we take a break and maybe we need to reconnect in the relationship and remember how we like each other. Maybe there needs to be a little bit of recultivating the positive things in the relationship, but we do come back to it, come back to the conflict, and it can be helpful, especially in like cohabitating partnerships where you're together all the time in order to not feel like you're getting blindsided by conflicts or by the conflict coming back up. It can be helpful to specifically set a time. Tomorrow, after the kids go to bed, we're going to talk about this some more. So that people know nobody is sitting there wondering like, when is it going to come back up? When is it going to come? And in that place of anxiety. And also nobody is like thinking this has just gone away and everything's perfect. So setting a schedule to talk about it can be really helpful sometimes. Sometimes that's not necessary depending on the relationship and the conflict that you're having. So there has to be trust that if you ask for a boundary, it's going to be respected. So that means if I say I need a break, then you're gonna have enough self-regulation skills, enough self-knowledge to be able to pause, to be able to let me go take a break without following me, without continuing to hammer on it, without, you know, any kind of meanness about needing a break. That there's that's a piece of the safety. So to now start to shift it towards the safety piece, having healthy conflict requires there to be a sense of safety in the relationship because conflict generally brings up some fight, flight, freeze energy, especially if we have a lot of experience with unhealthy conflicts. If we have a lot of experience with relationships in which you have to appease somebody in order to end conflicts, in order to stay in connection, or where you have an avoidant relationship and any kind of conflict, everybody just kind of emotionally separates and it feels cold and distant. Um, or you have an anxious relationship where any kind of conflict then leads to this like clingy bids for attention, desperately trying to reconnect. When you have any of those kinds of patterns in your history, you're going to have some of that kind of activation, fight, flight, freeze activation when a conflict happens. And maintaining some of those things, staying present, asking for what you need, and also keeping the conflict. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but this is really important. Healthy conflict is about understanding each other first. It's not about winning and it's not about solving. It's about understanding each other deeply first. And only after we completely understand the other person, we understand to a point where I can be like, yeah, I totally understand your position. I can put myself in your shoes and come to the same conclusion. I totally get where you're coming from. And truly believe that, not just say the words, but truly feel that. When we have that kind of understanding, both directions, to truly understand each other, that's when we can find solutions that actually work for everybody. But we can't start with the solutions, and if there's any hint of anybody trying to win or be right and convince the other person, then it's never going to be able to be a healthy conflict, because you can't get to that understanding place if you're definitely sure you're right. So some of those are skills to work on separately as well as together. So coming back to safety, if there is a long established sense of safety in the relationship, then it's easier to recognize, oh, I'm going into a fight response, or I'm going into a fawn response right now. And then check in with reality and say, I don't think that's necessary in this relationship, in this situation. And that, but that's the piece that's key there is when we check in with reality, in some relationships, it is actually necessary. If you want to stay in connection, you're not going to be able to have healthy conflict. And so there has to already be a baseline of there's enough safety that when we check back in, we go, oh, yeah, I have so much experience of being able to disagree or have conflict or ask for what I need and have that be met in this relationship, that I can feel pretty safe about not going into one of these survival strategies. So the reason I'm recording this is because that's the question I got. I got the question of, how do you know if it's safe? How do you know if that's safe? And the answer is in little pieces. The answer is you can't know that. It's not like some people are magically safe and some people are magically not safe. And if you just have good instincts, you'll know that the minute you meet them. That's not how it works. In relational safety, we're testing that in little bits over time and seeing what happens. So, in early in meeting somebody, it might be, oh, we're having a conversation and I need to pee, and I'm checking in with my own body and I'm saying, you know what? Give me a sec. I'll be right back, and running to the bathroom. And having that little pause that isn't about emotions, that isn't about feeling scared, that's I would hope most people watching this can be like, yeah, that's a completely reasonable thing to do in a conversation, is pause and go to the bathroom, right? It's completely reasonable, but it's also that completely reasonableness makes it a very low barrier. And it's not even that you do that as a test. It's just those things happen in interacting with someone. And so, oh, okay, that person was like, yeah, absolutely, go to the bathroom. And so then that builds a little bit of trust of, okay, I can say what I need. And then, building on as we get closer to somebody, those opportunities get a little bit deeper. Um, if we do things together, we have more opportunities to ask for what we need, or to express discomfort with something, or to express some kind of vulnerability. So in the case of the friend who inspired all of this, we climbed together, and that's an activity in which there have been opportunities where I've said something like, I'm feeling kind of nervous today. I'd really like it if you belay me in this way. And, again, that's a perfectly reasonable and not especially emotionally charged request, but it is there's a little bit of emotional vulnerability, right? I'm sharing that I'm feeling something and that I need support. And then when I enthusiastically get the support I'm asking for, it builds trust and it builds safety. And then it feels a little safer to make a little bit bigger ask, maybe another time. And then that being seen and being respected brings a little bit more safety. And so in this case, again, this is not the first time that we've had some of these same disagreements even. And the first time that I needed to say, you know what, this is too much for me right now. I don't have the bandwidth for this conversation right now. There were other things happening in my life, and I was like, I'm like zoning out. I can't even stay present right now. And I didn't necessarily say all of that, but I said, you know what, I'm really sorry, but I just don't have the bandwidth for this right now. I can't do this right now. And there was a part of me, even though we had all these other ways that safety had been established, there was a part of me that feared that that might be the end of the friendship. And instead, what I got back was, oh, yeah, of course, we can talk about this anytime. No worries. Take care of yourself. And also, I'm sorry, I can see that I was being a little unnecessarily aggressive. That part's on me. And so then that's a big piece of safety to then feel like I can go back into a similar conflict, knowing that I can stop if I need to, and knowing that that won't be relationship ending to stop in the middle of having a conflict. So uh, those are the pieces. We need self awareness. Both parties need self awareness. We need healthy boundaries, and we need safety in the relationship. And if you are wondering about how to get better at any of those three things, either for yourself generally and how you recognize your own needs, how you communicate them, how you communicate with people in conflict, those are all skills for you. Uh, if there's somebody with whom you're having challenging conflict and they're willing, there may also be skills for them to develop. Although ultimately we can't force somebody else to do their work. And then there are the relational skills. How do you interact with each other, or what comes up for each of you when you're in conflict or when you're trying to deal with something difficult? All of those pieces, these are all skills. These are not things people are innately born with. Some of us, through our life experiences, have a harder time. We have bigger hurdles to cross in order to learn these things. And some of us have an easier time because we see them modeled growing up. But they're all skills and they're all learnable. And all of these things can be features of your relationships in healthy relationships. So this is why we have workshops. And the next workshop I have coming up in December is about navigating difficult family relationships during the holidays, which is this. It's this. It's this, but not necessarily with your partner, with other people further out in your orbit. So yeah, we're going to be talking more about conflict. We're going to be talking more about boundaries in that workshop, and that workshop is completely free to attend. So you can find the date for that, and you can sign up for my email newsletter where you'll get reminders of those kinds of things at jengerardi.com, which is linked in the notes for this episode. And I also have small group calls and one-on-one calls, and those are places where we can work on that kind of skill development, because all of these things can be learned and can become the new normal for you. So I look forward to connecting with you, and I'm wishing you a great rest of your day.